A 7-year-old girl heard a man breathing beneath the floor of an abandoned factory. When she looked down through the rusted grate, she saw blood on his face, dust in his hair, and one hand shaking so badly he could not hide it. He told her to run. He told her the place was not safe, but the little girl did not know he was the most feared mafia boss in Detroit. She did not know her mother had every reason to hate him. She only saw a wounded man trying not to cry. So she whispered, "Don't cry, sir. My mom will save you." What she didn't know was that her promise would uncover a betrayal buried for years, expose the man who poisoned a king from inside his own throne room, and force one powerful man to choose between revenge and the truth. Welcome to our channel, where we explore stories of mafia bosses, power, loyalty, and the hidden rules of survival. Some men are born to dominate. Some lessons are never taught in school, only in the brutal classroom of life. This channel does not glorify crime. It tells stories about mindset, courage, discipline, and the secrets behind real power. Tonight's story reminds us that compassion is not weakness. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room can awaken the strongest truth. If this story moves you, like the video, share it with someone who loves powerful stories, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, courage, and the price of power.
Marcus Vale woke before the city did. He always had. Long before the first trucks coughed awake in the warehouse districts, before the diner lights flickered on along Jefferson Avenue, before the factory men pulled their collars up against the Detroit cold, Marcus was already standing at the glass wall of his penthouse, watching the city like a man watching a sleeping animal. From the 28th floor, Detroit looked peaceful. Snow rested on the rooftops in a thin gray sheet. The river was black and still. The streets below were almost empty, but Marcus knew better than to trust a quiet city. Quiet only meant the deals were being made indoors. He held a glass of water in his right hand. The left hand was hidden in the pocket of his robe. That was new. For most of his life, Marcus Vale had never needed to hide any part of himself. He was not a loud man. He did not slam doors. He did not wave guns around. He did not raise his voice unless there was no other choice, and there was almost always another choice. Men listened to Marcus because they understood that silence coming from him was not weakness. It was warnings. A soft sentence from Marcus Vale could close a business, end a contract, ruin a career, or make a dangerous man suddenly remember he had a family to go home to. Lately, there was one thing Marcus could not control. His left hand trembled. At first it had been small. A flicker in the fingers, something he could explain away as fatigue, too much coffee, not enough sleep. Then it became harder to ignore. A pen slipping during a signature. A cufflink taking too long to fasten. A glass rattling lightly against a tabletop before he could still it. No one had said anything. No one around Marcus Vale was foolish enough to notice what he did not want noticed, but Marcus had seen their eyes drop. Just for half a second, that was enough. He pulled his hand from his pocket and looked at it. The tremor came again, small, ugly, honest. Marcus stared at his hand with cold disgust, as if it belonged to someone else. He closed his fist until his knuckles whitened. The shaking stopped for a moment, but only because he forced it to. He had built an empire on force. Force of money, force of fear, force of patience, force of reputation. But a body was different. A body did not care who feared you. Behind him, the clock clicked to 530 points. He drank the water, then he dressed by 715. He was in a black sedan moving through the city. He wore a charcoal suit, a white shirt, and a dark tie with no pattern. His driver did not speak. Nobody in Marc's world filled silence unless invited. Outside the window, Detroit passed in long strips of brick, steel, snow, and steam. Old factories stood beside new glass buildings. Churches sat across from liquor stores. Men in work boots waited for buses with their hands deep in their pockets. He watched them without expression. Some of those men worked in buildings he controlled. Some of them paid union dues that passed through accounts he influenced. Some of them fed families because his arrangements kept certain factories open. Others had been hurt in places where his name was never written but always felt. Marcus knew both things were true. He had long ago stopped pretending the world was clean. The best a man could do, he told himself, was keep the worst men from taking everything. It was a useful belief. Useful beliefs were not always true. Industrial office sat in a restored building downtown, all polished stone, dark wood, and thick glass. It looked legitimate because most of it was. That was the secret people misunderstood. Marcus did not run his world from back rooms full of smoke. He ran it through contracts, debt, payroll companies, trucking schedules, labor negotiations, security firms, and law offices with expensive coffee machines. A street criminal needed a weapon. Marcus needed a calendar. When he entered the conference room that morning, the argument inside died before he reached his chair. 6 men sat around the table, 2 factory owners, a union negotiator, a lawyer, a logistics broker, a city consultant who pretended not to know why he had really been invited. They all stood when Marcus came in, though he had never asked them to. Marcus sat, and they sat. He listened for 9 minutes, whilst grown men explained why they could not keep promises they had made in writing. He did not interrupt. He did not blink much. When they finished, he placed one hand on the table and said, "The workers get their back pay by Friday. Working delay is absorbed by Collier, not the plant. The safety inspection happens next week, not next month, and nobody here says the word strike again, unless they want to learn how expensive that word can become." No one argued. The union negotiator swallowed and nodded first, then the others followed. That was how it usually went. Marcus did not win by making people feel small. He won by making them feel seen, measured, and already out of options. As the meeting ended, Leon Ashby entered through the side door. Leon was 52, lean, neat, and quiet in a way that matched Marcus' own silence too closely to be accidental. Been at Marcus' side for 20 years. He knew which calls to block, which men to flatter, which threats to take seriously, and which ones to let die from lack of attention. If Marcus was the name people feared, Leon was the hand that moved before the name had to be spoken. Leon placed a sealed bottle of water near Marcus' right hand. "Your 10 o'clock is confirmed," Leon said. "Collier will behave. The councilman wants reassurance, and Greystone sent another request for delay." Marcus picked up the bottle, broke the seal, and drank. He did not think about it. Why would he? Leon had brought him water every morning for as long as he could remember. All routines were the bones of trust. A man did not question the floor. Every time he walked across a room, "Greystone can wait," Marcus said. Lon's eyes moved briefly to Marcus' left hand. It rested flat on the table. Too flat. Too deliberately stills. Marcus saw him notice. Lon looked away as if he had not. After the others left, Marcus remained seated. The conference room was quiet now, the long table reflecting the pale morning light. He looked down at his left hand. The tremor returned, barely visible, but there he pressed his palm harder against the wood. Leon closed the door. Grace called again. Leon said. Marcus did not look up. "I know," she said. "You missed your last appointment." "I know, that too." A pause. "You should go." Marcus smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "You giving medical advice now? I'm giving practical advice." Marcus finally looked at him. Practical advice is what people call fear when they want it to sound useful. Leon absorbed that without reaction. He was good at absorbing things. Insults, orders, secrets, blood when necessary. Marcus leaned back. "I want the transition documents ready by the end of the month." Leon's face did not change, but the room seemed to tighten. "The end of the month," Leon repeated. "Some of the factories go clean. The shells dissolve. The worker funds get separated from the holding companies. We start with Greystone." Marcus. It was rare for Leon to say his name like that. Marcus's eyes hardened. "I didn't ask if it was convenient." "No," Leon said. "I have kept this city balanced for 20 years. I want to leave behind a feeding ground for men with less restraint." "You were not leaving." Marcus looked at his hand again. This time he did not hide it fast enough. The fingers shook, once, twice, then stilled. Leon saw. "Knew he saw," I said. "Prepare the documents," Marcus said. Leon lowered his head, of course. Across town, Dr. Emma Harper was ending a 12-hour shift that had turned into 14. The community clinic smelled of antiseptic, burnt coffee, and wet winter coats. Emma moved from room to room with the focused exhaustion of a woman who had learned to keep going because stopping would not make anything easier. She stitched a teenager SI eyebrow, adjusted medication for an elderly woman who could not afford a specialist, and set the broken finger of a warehouse worker who insisted he had done it at home. He had not done it at home. Emma knew that before he finished lying. His hand was swollen purple. Grease marked his sleeve. Fear sat in his eyes like a second injury. "What factory?" she asked. The man looked away. "Does matter? It matters if the machine wasn't guarded." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You gonna fix that too, Doc?" Emma wrapped the splint carefully. "I can write a report. That report gets me fired. Not if it was one of Vale's places," he whispered. The name hit the room and stayed there. Emma's hands did not stop moving, but something in her face closed. fail. Even after all these years, the names still had weight. It pulled her backward into hospital corridors, police reports, unanswered calls, and the night 2 officers came to her door to tell her Daniel was gone. Daniel Harper had been a good man, a labor attorney, a stubborn believer in rules, even when rules were written by men who broke them for sport. He had been investigating factory injuries before he died. The official report called it an accident. Emma had never believed the official report. That evening, she came home to a small house on a quiet street where the porch light flickered unless she hit the switch twice. Lily was at the kitchen table in pajamas, coloring with serious concentration. At 7 years old, Lily had Daniel's thoughtful eyes and Emma's habit of pressing her lips together when she was thinking. "What are you drawing, Bug?" Emma asked, dropping her bag by the door. Lily turned the paper around. It showed a woman in a white coat pulling a man out of a dark hole. The man was covered in gray scribbles, his hand was shaking. A little girl stood nearby holding a yellow flashlight. Emma smiled tiredly. That's dramatic." "He was scared," Lily said. "Was." Lily shrugged the man. Emma studied the drawing for a moment longer than she meant to. Then she kissed Lily's hairs. "Well, I'm glad someone came to help him." Lily nodded, as if that part was obvious. Later, after Lily was asleep, Emma stood in the hallway outside her daughter's room and looked at the drawing again. She did not know why it bothered her. Children drew strange things. That was all downtown. Ashby stood alone in Marcus' office, the city lights reflected in the window before him. Marcus' desk sat the empty water bottle from that morning. Leon picked it up with a gloved hand and dropped it into a leather bag. Then he made one phone call. When the voice on the other end answered, Leon spoke quietly. He asked, moving faster than expected. Said, "We need to slow him down." Then he listened. "No," Leon said. "Not dead. I told you before. I don't want him dead." He looked out over the sleeping city. "I want him to need me." Emma Harper did not want to go anywhere near Greystone. She had avoided that part of Detroit for years without ever admitting it out loud. There were plenty of reasons a person might avoid old factory blocks in winter. The roads were bad. The buildings were half empty. The streetlights flickered more than they worked. But Emma knew the real reason. Greystone was one of the last places Daniel had been investigating before he died, and grief had a strange way of turning streets into memories. Some people could drive past a building and see brick. Emma drove past Greystone and saw police tape, unanswered questions, and her husband's coat hanging untouched in the hallway for months because she could not bring herself to move it. Still, the call had come from the outreach clinic that morning, and Emma had said yes. Retired factory workers needed exams. Some of them had lung problems from years of breathing dust nobody had warned them about. Some had hands that no longer closed properly. Some came in with pain they had carried for so long they spoke about it like weather. Emma could not fix the past, but she could show up with a stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, and enough patience to make one person feel less forgotten for 10 minutes. That mattered to her. On hard days, it was the only thing that did. The problem was Lily's babysitter canceled 40 minutes before Emma had to leave. So Lily came along in her pink winter coat, carrying a coloring book, a box of crayons, and the stuffed rabbit she insisted was old enough to make his own decisions. Buckled her into the back seat and gave her the speech twice on the drive over. "Stay in the break room. Do not wander. Do not open doors. Do not follow animals. Do not talk to strangers unless Mom is beside you." Lily listened with the solemn attention of a child who planned to obey at least most of it. The outreach clinic had been set up in a low, brick building across from the old Greystone property. Volunteers had brought folding tables, portable heaters, donated blankets, and coffee that tasted burned before anyone poured it. Emma kissed the top of Lily's head, set her up in the break room with crackers and crayons, and pointed to the doorway. "Stay where I can find you," Emma said. Lily nodded. "I know." Emma crouched until they were eye to eye. "Promise me." "I promise that should have been enough." Most tragedies began with something that should have been enough. For the first hour, Lily did exactly what she was told. She colored a picture of a snowman with a scarf, then a dog wearing boots, then a house with yellow windows. From the next room, she could hear her mother's calm voice asking people to breathe deep, squeeze her fingers, tell her where it hurt. Lily liked that voice. It was the voice Emma used when the world was not behaving, and she had decided to make it behave anyway. Lily heard the cough. It was faint, so faint that at first she thought it came from the pipes. The old building made noises. Radiators knocked. Wind pushed through gaps in the windows. Somewhere outside, a loose metal sign kept tapping against a pole, but then it came again. A cough. A person cough. Lily lifted her head. The hallway beside the break room led to a locked storage area, but past that was another door. One Emma had not mentioned. It was cracked open just enough to show darkness beyond it. Lily stood very still. She knew she was not supposed to wander. She also knew people were not supposed to be coughing alone in dark places. She picked up the flashlight from her mother's medical bag. Emma had told her not to touch the medical bag unless it was an emergency. Lily decided this might count. Across the street, inside the Greystone factory, Marcus Vale was beginning to understand he had been invited to his own grave. He had not wanted to come. His body had been bad that morning, not terrible. Marcus had learned to measure decline in private degrees, a worse tremor than yesterday. A longer pause before his left foot obeyed. A flicker in memory that vanished before he could grab it. But Leon had told him the leak might be inside Greystone, and Greystone was too important to leave to other men. It was the first property Marcus intended to clean up, the first thread he planned to pull from the old machine. Maybe that was why he came himself. Maybe power had made him too accustomed to walking into dangerous rooms and expecting the room to be the one afraid. The factory smelled of rust, oil, and wet concrete. Snow blew through broken upper windows and melted on the floor in gray patches. Marcus walked through the main level with his coat buttoned and his phone in his right hand. 2 of his men were supposed to be outside. Another was supposed to check the rear entrance, but the deeper he went, the more wrong the silence felt. Marcus stopped near the stairwell. The lights went out. A steel door slammed behind him. He turned toward the sound, and for one sharp second, his left hand shook so badly. He nearly dropped the phone. Then the floor moved. The explosion was not loud in the way people imagine explosions. It was low, violent, and close, like the building had been punched from underneath. The concrete cracked beneath Marcus's feet. The world tilted. His shoulder hit metal. His phone flew from his hand and shattered somewhere in the dark. Then the floor gave way. He fell through dust and broken light. Landed, pain took the air from him. For several seconds, Marcus could not hear anything except a high ringing inside his skull. He tried to move and understood with cold clarity that something heavy had pinned his leg. A beam, maybe. Part of the floor. He could not see well enough to tell. Dust filled his mouth. His ribs burned. Warm blood slid down the side of his face. His left hand trembled violently against the concrete, no matter how hard he tried to still it. He forced himself to breathe once. Twice, then, he called out. No answer. He reached for his phone and found only broken glass. Above him, Lily followed the sound into the old service corridor connecting the clinic building to part of the Greystone structure. She did not go far. Even at 7, she could feel that the place was not meant for children. The air was colder. The walls smelled damp. Her flashlight beam shook a little in her hand. She was about to turn back when the cough came again. Clearer now, from below. Lily moved toward a rusted floor grate. She knelt carefully, the way Emma had taught her to kneel when looking for something under a car seat. She shined the flashlight down through the metal bars. At first she saw only dust. Then a face. A man lay below her in the broken dark. He was covered in gray powder and blood. His suit was torn at the shoulder. One leg disappeared beneath a slab of concrete. His eyes opened when the light touched him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus saw a little girl in a pink coat, her eyes wide, her face pale in the flashlight glow. He thought of every dangerous thing in that building, every man who might still be nearby, every reason she needed to run. He tried to make his voice firm. Go, Hess said. This place is unsafe. The little girl did not move. Are you stuck? He whispered. He swallowed against the dust in his throat. Go find an adult. My mom is an adult, then find her. Lily looked at his hand. It was shaking against the concrete. She looked at the blood on his cheek. She looked at the way he kept blinking fast, as if he was trying to keep pain from showing on his face. Are you crying? She asked. No. Marcus almost laughed, but it turned into a cough. No. His voice broke on the word. Lily's expression changed, not fear exactly. Something softer. Something Marcus had not seen directed at him in so long. He almost did not recognize it. Pity. No, not pity, care. She leaned closer to the grate. Don't cry, sir, she said. My mom will save you. The word struck him harder than the fall had. Marcus Vale had been called many things in his life, boss. Mr. Son of a bitch. Mr. Vale, sir, by men who were afraid. But this child called him sir like it meant he was simply a person, a hurt person, a person who could be helped. He closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, she was already standing. At her, Lily said. Then she ran. Marcus listened to her footsteps fade down the corridor for the first time since the floor collapsed. Something almost like hope moved through him. Then another sound reached him from the darkness behind the broken stairs. Slow footsteps. Adult footsteps. Marcus turned his head as far as the pain allowed. Someone was coming back. And whoever it was, they were not coming to save him. He ran so fast down the service corridor that the flashlight beam jumped wildly across the walls. Her little boots slapped against the cracked concrete, and for one terrible second she thought the darkness behind her was running too. The old hallway seemed longer now than it had when she first followed the sound. Every pipe looked like an arm, every shadow looked like a person waiting. She wanted to cry, but she did not. Her mother had always told her that being scared was not the same as being helpless. So Lily kept running, clutching the flashlight in both hands, until she burst through the half-open door and back into the break room, where her crayons still lay scattered across the table. Emma was in the next room, wrapping a retired worker's wrist, when she heard Lily call her, not the ordinary call. The bored, impatient mom of a child who wanted juice or attention. This was sharp, breathless, wrongs. Emma stepped away from the patient at once, her body moving before her mind caught up. She found Lily standing in the doorway, pale and shaking, still holding the flashlight from Emma's medical bag. "Lily Harper," Emma said, fear turning her voice hard before she could stop it. "Where were you?" "There's a man," Lily said, "under the floor." Emma stared at her. "What?" He stuck. "Blood, he told me to go." "But I told him you would save him." The room seemed to narrow around Emma for a second. All she saw was the flashlight in Lily's hands, the old building, the broken surface hallway, the Greystone property across the way. Her daughter had wandered into a place Emma had specifically told her not to go, and somewhere under that place, if Lily was telling the truth, there was an injured man. Emma wanted to scold her. She wanted to grab her by the shoulders and tell her never, never to do that again. But Lily's face stopped her. It was not imagination. This was not a child making a story out of shadows. "Show me," Emma said. Lily nodded and turned back toward the hallway. Emma grabbed her emergency bag from the clinic table and called over her shoulder for one of the volunteers to contact rescue services. Then she followed her daughter through the service corridor, each step awakening old dread in her chest. Greystone had been empty for years, but it had never felt dead to Emma. It felt like a thing that remembered. Daniel had spoken about this place in the final months of his life, not constantly. Daniel had never wanted to frighten her, but enough. Enough that Emma knew the name Greystone did not belong to the past, not completely. Lily stopped at the rusted floor grate and pointed down. "There," she whispered. Emma knelt. She shined the flashlight through the bars. At first the beam caught only dust, broken concrete, and twisted metal. Then the light settled on a man's face. Stop breathing. She knew him, not personally, not in the way one knows a neighbor, a friend, a patient, or the parent of a child from school. She knew him the way people in Detroit knew certain names without ever being introduced. She had seen his photograph in old articles, heard his name in whispers from injured workers, seen men lower their voices when they said it. Marcus Vale. For several seconds, Emma did not move. Below her was covered in blood and dust. His expensive coat was torn. His leg was pinned beneath concrete. His left hand trembled against the floor as if it no longer belonged to him. He looked up through the grate, and when the light touched his eyes, recognition moved through them too. Lily stood beside Emma, breathing hard. "That says him," she said. "That says the man." Emma's grip tightened around the flashlight. Marcus swallowed. Even from above, she could see what the effort cost him. "Out of here," he said. His voice was low, strained, but still carried the habit of command. Emma felt something cold pass through her, even trapped under a collapsed floor. Marcus Vale sounded like a man used to being obeyed. "Mom," Lily whispered. "Help him." Marcus's eyes shifted from Lily to Emma. "Harper?" he asked. It was only one word, but it changed the air. Emma's chest tightened. He knew the name. He knew her name, or at least Daniel S. That meant Daniel had not been just another dead man in some forgotten file. That meant Marcus Vale had heard the name Harper before, and whatever he knew, he had kept it buried with everything else. For one dark second, Emma did nothing. It was the kind of second people do not confess to later. The kind that comes from grief before morality has time to dress it up. She looked at Marcus Vale trapped under broken concrete, and a terrible thought crossed her mind. If she waited, if she walked away, if rescue came too late, the world might be lighter by one dangerous man. The man below her belonged to the world that had swallowed Daniel. The world of quiet threats, sealed reports, paid witnesses, and factory accidents that happened to men who asked too many questions. Then Lily touched her sleeve. Mom, she said again, smaller. "This time I promised him." That was what brought Emma back, not Marcus' pain, not his name, not the blood on his face, her daughter's promise. Emma closed her eyes for one brief moment, and when she opened them, she was a doctor again. "Marcus," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "Can you breathe?" He stared at her for half a second, as if surprised she had chosen to help. Then he answered, "Yes." "Any chest pain?" "Ribs." Sighed. "Can you move your toes?" A pause. "Right foot, yes. Left, no." Emma looked through the grate, calculating distance, angles, access. She could not reach him properly from here. The opening was too narrow. The collapse was below the main floor, probably part of an old maintenance level. She needed rescue equipment, but rescue would take time, and time was something the man below her might not have. She pulled supplies from her bag. Lily, listen carefully. I need you to stand right beside me. Move away from this spot. Do not go back down that hallway. Do you understand? Lily nodded. I need. The small flashlight pointed at his face, not his eyes, enough so I can see him. Lily obeyed. Her hands shook, but she held the lid's light steady. Emma called emergency services herself this time. She reported a structural collapse and an injured adult male pinned under debris. She did not give his name. She did not know why at first. Because Marcus shook his head when she reached that part. Maybe because his eyes told her something she did not want to understand. Maybe because in this city, names traveled faster than ambulances. When she hung up, Marcus said, if they broadcast my name, the wrong people may come before the right ones. Emma looked down at him. Someone did this to you. He did not answer quickly. That was answer enough. Emma's jaw tightened. Who? Marcus coughed, and the sound scraped through his body. Someone close enough to know I'd come alone. Lily's eyes widened. Somebody hurt you on purpose? Marcus looked at the little girl, and something in his expression changed. Softness, exactly, more like shame passing behind a locked door. Yes, he said. I think so. Emma took a breath and forced herself back into the work. Stay awake. Do not try to move the concrete. If you feel more pressure in your chest, you tell me immediately. If your leg goes cold, you tell me. If you taste blood, you tell me. Marcus gave the smallest nod. Lily lowered herself to her knees beside the grate. Talk to him, she said, so he does asleep. Emma almost told her no. Then she saw Marcus blinking slowly, fighting the pull of pain and shock. Okay, Emma said, you stay right next to me. Lily leaned toward the grate. What's your name? Marcus hesitated. Marcus, I'm Lily. My mama's name is Emma. She's really good at saving people. I can see that she saved a man once who swallowed a fishbone and thought he was dying. Despite everything, Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not hurt him. That sounds serious. It was very serious. Lily said. I'd more than you. Emma glanced at her daughter, startled by the calm in her voice. Children had a way of stepping over terror when adults were still trying to name it. Lily looked back down. Do you have kids? Marcus asked. His face went still. No, then who takes care of you? The question was so simple that it cut through the cold air more cleanly than accusation ever could. Marcus did not answer. Emma heard the silence. She had spent years imagining Marcus Vale as a shadow, a force, a name attached to pain. But now he was a man under broken concrete with no one to answer a childish question. He had men, surely. Lawyers, guards, people who would kill for him or die for him or lie for him, but that was not what Lily had asked. Who takes care of you? Emma checked his pupils through the grate. Something was wrong, more wrong than a collapse injury. His left hand trembled too violently. His reflexes seemed uneven. Speech, though controlled, carried a faint delay, as if each word had to cross a damaged bridge before reaching his mouth. How long has your hand been shaking? Emma asked. Marcus looked up at her. That is tea from the fall, she said. His eyes narrowed. No, how long? Months. Diagnosis? A pause. Neurological degeneration. Emma studied him. From whom? Specialists, and you believe them? I paid them enough to be right. That's not how medicine works. Another faint, painful, almost smile touched his mouth before he could answer. A sound echoed from deeper in the ruined level below them. Metal scraping concrete. Froze. Marcus' eyes shifted toward the darkness behind him. Lily whispered, What was that? Marcus's voice changed. It became quieter, colder, more like the man Detroit feared. Emma, he said, and using her name for the first time, take your daughter and move away from the grate. Emma, down there. Marcus. The footsteps came again. Slow, careful. Not rescue. Marcus tried to reach for something inside his coat, but pain stopped him. Jaw clenched. His left hand shook uselessly against the floor. Emma understood then. Whoever had trapped him had come back, and for the first time since Lily had led her to the grate, Emma was not deciding whether Marcus Vale deserved to live. She was deciding whether all three of them might die. Emma moved before fear could make her slow. She grabbed Lily by the shoulders and pulled her back from the grate, pressing one finger to her own lips. Lily understood. Her eyes were wide and wet, but she did not make a sound. Then, Marcus turned his head toward the deeper darkness of the collapsed level. The footsteps had stopped. And somehow that was worse. Silence, Emma had learned, was not always peace. Sometimes silence meant someone was listening. Marcus tried to shift his weight, but the concrete pinning his leg held him in place. Pain tightened his mouth. For the first time since Emma had seen him, he looked less like a powerful man and more like exactly what he was trapped, bleeding, and waiting to find out whether the next person who reached him would save him or finish the job. Emma looked around the service corridor. There was an old metal pipe running along the wall, loose at one bracket. She pulled it free with both hands, the sound sharp enough to make Lily flinch. She did not know how to fight men from Marcus Vale's world, but she knew how to protect a child that was older than fear. She pushed Lily behind her and whispered, "If I tell you to run, you run back to the clinic and you do not look behind you." Lily nodded. Clutching the flashlight against her chest from below, Marcus said quietly, "Emma," she looked down. "There is a service hatch 12 feet to your left," he said. "If someone comes up, it will be there." Emma hated that he was useful. She hated that she needed him. But she moved her eyes toward the hatch and raised the pipe. A shadow shifted beneath the grate. Then a man coughed, cursed under his breath, and stepped into a slice of Lily's flashlight beam. A dark jacket and gloves. He looked down at Marcus, not at Emma. "You re hard to kill," the man said. Marcus did not answer. His face had gone still in a way that frightened Emma, more than anger would have. The man lifted something in his hand. Emma could not see if it was a gun or a phone. She did not wait to find out. She slammed the pipe against the metal grate as hard as she could. The crash exploded through the corridor. He screamed. The man below jerked back, startled. At the same moment, sirens rose in the distance, real siren, close ones. The man looked toward the sound, then toward Marcus, and made the only practical choice left to him. He disappeared into the darkness. By the time rescue crews reached them, Emma's hands were shaking so badly, she had to hide them in her coat pockets. She gave instructions fast, clear, and cold. Adult male, crush injury, possible rib fractures, blood loss, altered neurological signs, trapped beneath partial collapse. Bill did not give his name. The firefighters cut through the access hatch and descended with braces, lifting equipment, and hard voices that made the ruined building feel less haunted. It took nearly 40 minutes to free Marcus. He did not cry out when they raised the beam, but his face turned gray and his breathing broke. Lily stood beside Emma, the whole time both hands wrapped around her mother's sleeve. When they finally pulled Marcus out, he was barely conscious. His expensive suit was ruined. Dust had turned his dark hair almost white at the edges. Blood ran down his temple and into the collar of his shirt. He opened his eyes once as they loaded him onto a stretcher. He stepped forward before Emma could stop her. "See," she whispered, "I told you my mom would save you." Marcus looked at the little girl as if her words had reached him from very far away. Then his eyes closed. Because of the snowstorm and the blocked main road, Emma made a decision she knew she would question later. Marcus needed stabilization before a long transfer, and the nearest hospital was already overwhelmed. The old clinic had oxygen, IV fluids, basic monitors, and one treatment room Emma could lock. It was not ideal. It was not safe, but medicine was often the art of choosing the least bad option before time ran out. Marcus Vale, the man she had spent years hating in silence, was carried into a back room of her clinic, while Lily sat outside with a volunteer and a paper cup of hot chocolate. She did not drink. Marcus woke to the sting of antiseptic and the pull of thread through skin. Emma was stitching his shoulder. For a moment, he did not know where he was. Then he saw her face above him, calm but hard, and memory returned. Greystone, the fall, the child, the promise he swallowed. "You've left me there," he said. Emma did not look up from the wound. "I thought about it." The honesty settled between them like a third person in the room. Marcus did not seem offended. If anything, he seemed to understand. "My husband's name was Daniel Harper," Emma said after a while. Her voice stayed steady, but Marcus heard what it cost her. He was a labor attorney. He investigated injured workers, unsafe factories, missing records. Then he died in a factory accident that never made sense. Marcus closed his eyes. "Didn't order your husband's death." Emma tied off the suture and finally looked at him. "Men like you didn't always need to give orders. Sometimes you just build a room where everyone knows what silence is worth for once." Marcus Vale had no answer. Emma turned away before her anger could shake her hands again. She checked the monitor, then his pupils, then the tremor in his left hand. It was still there, too strong, too uneven, too old to belong to tonight's injuries. She drew blood and ran the fastest tests she could. Results would need a better lab, but the first signs were enough to make her go quiet. Marcus noticed. "What?" he asked. Emma looked at the numbers again, then back at him. "You told me you were sick." "I am no," she said slowly. "You are not dying the way you think you are." Marcus stared at her. Emma lowered her voice. "Someone has been poisoning you for a long moment." Marcus Vale said nothing. He simply looked at Emma Harper as if she had spoken in a language he understood too well but refused to accept. "Poisoned." Did not belong in that small clinic room with its old cabinets, humming monitor, and cracked tile floor. It belonged in history books, in family wars, in whispered stories about men who smiled at dinner while waiting for another man to die. Marcus had survived bullets, betrayals, investigations, and men who had smiled while planning to cut his throat. But poison was different. Poison required access, patience, intimacy. Poison meant someone close enough to touch his daily life had been killing him one quiet dose at a time. Emma watched his face, and for the first time since Lily had found him under the factory, she saw real fear move through him, not panic. This did not seem like a man who panicked. It was colder than that. It was the fear of a man doing math in his head and hating the answer. She set the lab sheet on the metal tray beside him. "This is finals," she said. "I need a toxicologist to confirm the compound, but your symptoms don't match a clean neurological decline. They spike, then level, then spike again. That usually means exposure." Marcus turned his head slowly toward her. Exposure to what? Something synthetic. Something introduced repeatedly. Low dose, not enough to kill fast, enough to make you weak. His left hand trembled against the blanket. This time he did not hide it. Emma noticed that too. A powerful man could hide a shaking hand from a room full of frightened businessmen. He could not hide it from the doctor who had just told him his body might be a crime scene. She pulled a chair beside the cot and sat not gently, not warmly, but professionally. "Who prepares your medication?" Marcus looked away. "I have people, that's not an answer, it's the only one I have right now." Emma leaned forward. "Who brings your water?" Something changed in his eyes, then a door closing or opening. She could not tell which. "Who has access to your office before you arrive? Who knows what bottle you drink from? Who benefits if you become weak, but not dead?" Marcus closed his eyes. Leon's face came to him at once, and that was what made it unbearable. Leon placing the bottle on the desk every morning. Leon reminding him about appointments. Leon standing close enough to see the tremor before anyone else did. Leon, who had buried problems for him, protected him, lied for him, waited outside hospital rooms, and once pulled him bleeding from the back seat of a car without asking whether the blood was his. 20 years of loyalty rose in Marcus like a wall, but now, behind that wall, he heard the small crack of a bottle seal breaking. Across town, Leon Ashby sat in a parked car behind a closed medical supply warehouse, listening to a man in a wrinkled coat breathe too fast. Dr. Howard Keene had once been respected. Then came the lawsuit, the missing trial data, and the kind of quiet disgrace that left a brilliant man desperate enough to answer Leon's calls. Keene rubbed his hands together and shook his head. "You said controlled deterioration," he whispered. "You said he was already sick." Leon stared through the windshield. "Oh, gathered along the glass. He is sick, not like this. If another doctor runs a panel one already has." Keene turned pale, then "Stop. Whatever you're redoing, stop now." Leon's expression did not change. "That is not possible." "Why not just kill him then?" Keene asked, horrified by his own question. Leon finally looked at him. "'Cause dead men don't need anyone back at the clinic." Lily slipped into the room, carrying a sealed bottle of water in both hands. Emma started to tell her to go back outside, but Lily was already holding it toward Marcus with great seriousness. "Mom said you can only drink one. Nobody opened yet." Marcus looked at the bottle. Small thing. Plastic clear, harmless to anyone else. To him, it suddenly looked like a loaded gun. Lily noticed the pause. "Are you scared of water now?" she asked. Emma opened her mouth, but Marcus answered first. "Something like that." Lily nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Mom says scared people need choices." She twisted the cap until it cracked, then handed it to him. "Now you saw it open." Marcus took the bottle with his right hand. His throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with dust or injury. "You," he said. Lily smiled a little. "You're welcome, sir." Then Emma guided her back outside. When they were alone again, Emma lifted Marcus' torn coat from a chair to search for his identification and phone fragments. A folded piece of paper slipped from the inside pocket and fell to the floor. She picked it up without thinking. The paper was old, worn soft at the creases. On it was an address graystone. Beneath that, written in Daniel Harper's familiar handwriting, was a date from 8 years ago. Emma's face went white. She saw the paper in her hand and understood too late what she had found. Her voice was quiet now, more dangerous than shouting. "Why do you have my husband's S-name in your pocket?" Marcus stared at the note as if it had survived only to accuse him. "Because," he said slowly, "your husband tried to warn me." Emma did not move. Marcus swallowed, and I didn't listen. Emma did not scream when Marcus said Daniel had tried to warn him. In some ways, screaming would have been easier. It would have given the grief somewhere to go. Instead, she stood in the middle of that small clinic room with the old paper in her hand, staring at the handwriting she had not seen in years. Daniel's handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right, as if even his words were moving towards something. She knew every curve of it, She had seen it on grocery lists, birthday cards, legal pads, and the note he left on the refrigerator the morning he died back by 6. Don't let Lily eat cookies for dinner. Love you. Now that same handwriting sat on a piece of paper in Marcus Vale's coat. Emma looked at him and the room seemed to lose its air. Explain, she said. Marcus shifted on the cot, pain crossing his face before he could hide it. Your husband contacted me 8 years ago. He said someone inside the industrial network was staging accidents, varying injury claims, and using my name to scare workers into silence. Emma's fingers tightened around the paper. I did believe him. No, she said, Sushi. You didn't want to believe him. Marcus did not answer. That was the first honest thing he gave her. Before Emma could ask, more headlights swept across the frosted clinic window. Not an ambulance, too slow, too deliberate. Marcus saw the light and tried to sit up. His body failed him halfway. Emma moved to the window and lifted the blind just enough to see a black SUV idling near the curb. His voice dropped. We need to leave. Emma turned toward him. You can barely stand, then help me, or stay here and meet the people who came to finish what Greystone started. That was enough. Emma moved quickly. She told Lily to put on her coat, gave the volunteer a calm lie about transferring a patient, and guided Marcus through the back hallway with one arm around his waist. He was heavier than she expected, not because of size, but because wounded men never carried their own weight evenly. His breath caught with each step. Lily walked ahead, holding the flashlight, her small face serious and pale. They escaped through the rear exit into falling snow. Emma drove them to the one place she had avoided for years, Daniel's old house. Kept it after his death, though she rarely admitted why. Maybe because selling it felt like betraying him. Maybe because some part of her believed the house still held an answer. It sat on a quiet street with a sagging porch and a maple tree Daniel had planted when Lily was born. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old paper, and memory. Marcus sat in the living room beneath a framed photograph of Daniel holding baby Lily. He looked at the picture longer than Emma expected. That was him, he asked. That was him, Emma said. For a while no one spoke. Marcus told her what he remembered. Daniel had come with documents, worker statements, names, dates, and a pattern of accidents that looked too organized to be bad luck. Marcus had not ordered those accidents, but Daniel believed someone close to him was acting in his name. Marcus had taken the information and given it to Leon. A week later, Daniel was dead. Emma's face did not change, but something in her eyes broke open. You handed my husband's warning to the man who buried him, she said. Mark lowered his gaze. I didn't know that then, but you could have asked. Yes, you could have looked. Yes, you were powerful enough to find the truth. Marcus swallowed. Yes. Emma turned away before her hands began to shake. Walked to Daniel's old office, a room she had not entered in months. His books still lined the shelves. A coffee mug sat on the desk, empty and clean, because grief made people preserve foolish things. She opened drawers, checked folders, moved legal pads, searching without knowing what she hoped to find. Then she remembered something Daniel once said. If anything ever happens to me, don't look for the man who hated me. Look for the man who needed me quiet. Emma knelt beside the desk and ran her fingers under the bottom drawer. A loose wooden panel shifted. Behind it was a small hard drive wrapped in plastic. Breath caught in the living room. Marcus looked up as Emma returned with the drive in her hand. She connected it to Daniel's old laptop, which took forever to wake, as if even the machine did not want to disturb the dead. Finally, a folder opened. Inside was a video file. Emma clicked it. Daniel appeared on the screen, tired but alive. His face was thinner than Marcus remembered from the photograph. He looked directly into the camera. If you watching this, Daniel said, then I either ran out of time or trusted the wrong person. Emma covered her mouth. Continued, I don't know if Marcus Vale ordered what happened in those factories, but I know this. Leon Ashby is using Vale's name to make people disappear, and he is doing it with the confidence of a man who believes nobody will ever ask questions. Marcus went still. Daniel leaned closer to the camera. If I disappear, don't stop at the man everyone fears. Find the man who whispers in his ear. The video ended. For a long time the room was silent. Then a small voice came from the hallway. Lily stood there in her pajamas and winter boots, eyes full of tears. Looked at Marcus. Did you hurt my dad? Emma closed her eyes. Marcus slowly lowered himself from the chair until he was kneeling, though the pain made his face gray. I didn't kill him, he said, but I was powerful enough to ask what happened, and I did. That means I hurt him too. Silly stared at him, too young to understand all of it, old enough to know he was not lying. Emma looked at Marcus over her daughter's shoulder. She did not forgive him, but for the first time she believed he might finally be ready to tell the truth. The phone rang before anyone in the room had found the courage to speak again. It was Marcus' phone, the spare one. Emma had taken from his coat and charged beside Daniel's old laptop. The screen showed no name, only a private number. Still, Marcus knew. Some men did not need to sign their work. Some voices reached you before you even answered. Emma looked at him. Marcus looked at the phone. Then he picked it up and pressed speaker. For a moment there was only a soft hiss on the line. Leon Ashby said, "You always did have a talent for surviving things that should have killed you." Lily moved closer to Emma. Emma put one hand on her daughter's shoulder and pulled her back. Marcus did not look away from the phone. His face had gone still, but not empty. There was pain there now, and something worse than pain. "Recognition, Leon?" he said. "Marcus." The way Leon said his name was almost gentle, that made it colder. It was not the voice of a man caught in betrayal. The voice of a man who still believed he had the right to explain himself. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Daniel Harper tried to warn me." Leon was silent for half a second. Not long, just long enough to admit the truth without saying it. "Daniel Harper was going to destroy everything you built," Leon said. "He was going to tell the truth." "The truth?" Leon gave a quiet laugh. "The truth is a luxury men use when they don't have payrolls to meet, contracts to hold, enemies circling, and a city waiting to fall apart the second you blink. I protected you from a war." Emma felt her hand close into a fist. She wanted to speak, but Marcus lifted his eyes to her and gave the smallest shake of his head. "Yet you protected me?" Marcus asked. "I always protected you. You poisoned me this time." The silence lasted longer. Lily looked up at Emma. Her face was confused in the way children become confused when adults use familiar words for terrible things. Protect loyal family. Words that were supposed to mean safety had turned into knives. Leon exhaled. "Leaving." Marcus closed his eyes. "You were talking about dissolving companies," Leon continued, "cleaning up Greystones, moving factories into legitimate hands, paying people who would only use that money to come back for more. You were preparing to walk away from the only world that ever respected you." "No," Marcus said. "I was trying to stop it from rotting after me." "You don't get to leave, Marcus. Not after everything we survived. Not after everything I did so you could stay untouchable." Emma stepped forward then, unable to hold back. "Everything you did, you killed my husband." Leon's voice changed slightly. "Your husband was reckless. He was honest. Honest men get other people killed when they don't understand the size of what they are touching." Emma's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. "No, men like you kill them and call it necessity." There was another silence. Then Leon said, "Dr. Harper, you should take your daughter and go home. This is not your world." Emma looked at Lily, then at the photograph of Daniel on the wall. "It became my world the night my husband didn't come home." The phone clicked. A message came through. Emma picked it up before Marcus could. The screen was a photograph of Lily outside her school, taken days earlier. Lily in her red hat, Lily holding her backpack, Lily smiling at someone just outside the frame. Emma stopped breathing. Marcus saw the image and something in him broke loose. He tried to stand too fast. His injured leg buckled, and his weakened body betrayed him. He hit the edge of the table with one hand and almost fell. Emma caught him under the arm, more from instinct than mercy. John's voice came through the speaker, quiet and cruel. "You are not strong enough to protect them anymore." Marcus gripped the table until his knuckles whitened. His left hand shook violently. For the first time in years, rage came to him and found no body strong enough to carry it. That helplessness hurt worse than the poison. Emma looked at him, then at the phone, then at her daughter. Her fear was huge, but she forced it into a shape she could use. "Anger won't protect her," she said. "Evidence will." Marcus turned his head toward her. Emma's voice sharpened. "Want my help, you give me everything. Not the clean version, not the version that makes you look less guilty. Every company, every payment, every buried claim, every name Leon used, every worker who was threatened, every lawyer who signed off on silence, everything." Leon laughed softly through the phone. "Full Marcus, she wants to make you a witness against yourself." Marcus looked at Daniel's frozen image on the laptop screen, then at Lily, who was still staring at the photograph of herself from school, then at Emma, the woman who had every reason to leave him bleeding under concrete and had saved him anyway. "What happens if it destroys everything I built?" he asked. Emma did not blink. Then maybe it was built on people who were already broken. That sentence landed in the room like a verdict. Marcus picked up the phone. "Leon," he said, "I'm here. I trusted you with my life, and I honored that trust." "No," Marcus said. His voice was low now, but stronger than it had been all night. "You mistook loyalty for ownership." For the first time, Leon said nothing. Marcus looked at Emma. "You'll have the files." Emma nodded once from the hallway. Lily disappeared for a moment and returned, holding the drawing she had made the night before. The woman in the white coat, the man in the dark hole, the little girl with the flashlight. She handed it to Marcus carefully. "I think this was you," she said. He stared at the picture. His mouth tightened, not from pain this time, but from something much harder for him to control. After a long moment, he whispered, "I hope it still can be." Greystone looked different in daylight, but not safer. Snow had softened the edges of the old factory, covering broken glass, rusted metal, and the black scars left by years of neglect. From a distance, it almost looked peaceful. Up close, it looked like a place where men had been hurt and the walls had learned to keep quiet. Marcus stood outside the main entrance with Emma beside him, leaning more heavily on his cane than he wanted to admit. His coat was buttoned high against the cold. His left hand trembled inside his glove. This time he did not hide it from Emma. At no point she had already seen him under concrete, half-conscious, stripped of every lie power had ever given him. "You don't have to do this inside," Emma said. Marcus looked at the factory doors. "Yes, I do know you want to." He turned toward her, and for a moment the old Marcus almost came back, the man who could end a conversation with one look. But the look faded. He was too tired to pretend with her. "This is where he tried to bury me," he said. "This is where your husband N's trail ended. Leon is going to tell the truth. He can tell it in the place where he thought truth came to die." Emma did not like it. Everything in her wanted to take Lily, take the files, take Marcus's statement, and hand it all to people with badges and warrants. But she also understood something Daniel had understood too late. Evidence mattered, timing mattered, and powerful men, when cornered, had a way of making the truth look confused unless someone forced it into the open cleanly. Lily was not with them. Emma had left her with Nora Ellis, along with copies of Daniel S. files, Marcus S. signed preliminary statement, and instructions that made Nora S. face go pale. If Emma did not call within an hour, Nora would send everything to the federal attorney Daniel had once trusted. Emma had learned from grief. The truth would not be stored in one room with one person. Before they left the house, Lily had stood in the doorway holding her stuffed rabbit against her chest. She looked at Marcus with the solemn seriousness only children can have. "Don't make my mom cry again," she said. Marcus had answered, "I'll try not to." It was not a grand promise, it was not enough, but it was honest. Inside Greystone, the air smelled of wet concrete and old oil. Emma kept one hand near her phone and the other near the small medical kit under her coat. Marcus walked slowly, but he walked on his own. The deeper they went, the quieter the building became. Finally, they reached the old machinery floor where a metal table waited under a broken skylight. Leon Ashby was already there. He wore a dark overcoat and leather gloves. His silver hair was neat. His face showed no panic, no surprise, no shame. That was what made Emma hate him instantly. Daniel had died. Marcus had been poisoned. Workers had been silenced. The child had been threatened, and Leon stood there like a man arriving early for a business appointment. "Marcus," Leon said. Marcus placed a folder on the table, then another, then a small recorder. Leon glanced at them. Marcus said, "Toxicology, Daniel Harper S. video, transfer documents, trails, worker settlements, names." Leon smiled faintly. "She has made you sentimental." Emma stepped forward, but Marcus lifted a hand. "No," Marcus said. "She made me specific." For the first time, Leon's expressions changed. Marcus looked at the man who had stood beside him for 20 years. "Did I order Daniel Harper's death?" Leon did not answer. "Did I?" Leon's jaw tightened. "You told me to make the problem go away." Emma felt the words strike her like a physical blow. Marcus stared at Leon. He was a man. He was a threat. Leon said he was going to drag Greystone into court, then the trucking companies, then the insurance funds, then you. He thought truth was clean. Truth is never clean. Truth breaks things. Daniel wanted injured men paid. Emma said he wanted widows told why their husbands didn't come home. Leon looked at her with mild irritation. "Your husband had no sense of scale." Emma's voice went cold. "No, he had a conscience." Marcus opened the toxicology report. "This?" Leon looked at the page and sighed, as if Marcus had disappointed him by asking, "You were leaving, so you poisoned me. I slowed you down. You damaged my body. I kept you close." Leon's voice finally cracked, not with guilt, but with need. "You were going to hand everything away. You were going to let strangers manage what we built, with blood and patience. You were going to walk into some clean life and leave me standing in the ruins." Marcus' face tightened. "You wanted me weak. I wanted you to need someone who had never left. That is not loyalty." Leon's eyes sharpened. "I gave my life to standing beside you." Marcus leaned on the table, breathing through pain. "No, you gave your life to standing between me and the truth." Leon stared at him. Then he saw the recorder. First time fear crossed his face. Marcus pressed the button. The tiny red light blinked. "You don't get to call this loyalty anymore," Marcus said. Leon's fear vanished into something colder. He looked past Marcus toward the ceiling, where old sprinkler pipes ran like black veins. "Then, I suppose none of us leave clean." Emma smelled smoke before she saw it. A thin gray line curled from the far hallway, then another somewhere deeper in the factory. Fire began to breathe. Marcus turned toward Leon. Leon only said Greystone was always good at making deaths look like accidents. Then the lights went out. Smoke moved through Greystone like something alive. It crawled along the ceiling first, then dropped lower, thick and gray, turning the old factory into a place without distance. The broken skylight above them disappeared. The far wall disappeared. Even Leon, standing only 20 feet away, became a dark shape behind a curtain of smoke. Emma covered her mouth with her sleeve and reached for Marcus, but he was already turning toward the hallway where the fire had started. For one terrible second, she thought he meant to go after Leon. Then Marcus swayed. Pain slipped against the wet concrete, his left hand jerked open, useless and trembling, and his knees bent as if the strength had simply been cut from his body. Emma caught his arm before he hit the floor. "Marcus," she said sharply. "Look at me," he tried. His eyes found her, but they were unfocused. The smoke was getting to him faster than it should have. His ribs were still bruised from the collapse. His blood had already been poisoned for months, and his body had been living on borrowed strength since the night Lily found him under the grate. He coughed once hard, and the sound tore through him. "Go," he said. The files. Emma almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because men like Marcus always seemed to think sacrifice sounded better than obedience. "Stop giving orders," she snapped. "You read terrible," it beschregued. Somewhere behind them, metal crashed. Leon had tried to move toward the side exit and fallen when part of the old railing gave way. Emma saw him through the smoke, one arm twisted under him, his face pale with pain. He looked smaller now. Not harmless, never harmless, but smaller. The man who had poisoned Marcus, buried Daniel's warning, and called obsession loyalty was lying in the dirt of the same factory he had used to hide his sins. I saw him too leave him. Emma looked at Marcus, then at Leon. For one heartbeat, she wanted to. She thought of Daniel's video. Daniel's coat in the hallway. Lily asking if Marcus hurt her father. She thought of the photo Leon had sent of Lily outside her school. There were kinds of anger that felt almost clean because they were so deserved, but Emma knew better. Deserved anger could still make you into someone you would not recognize later. Moved first to Leon. He looked up at her, shocked. "Why?" Emma grabbed him under the shoulders and dragged him away from the spreading smoke, far enough that rescuers would see him when they came through. Her voice was breathless and cold. "Because my daughter is not going to learn mercy from a coward." Leon said nothing after that. Then Emma went back for Marcus. He was on one knee now, trying to rise and failing. She got his arm over her shoulders, but he was too heavy, and the smoke was pressing down. Every breath burned the recorder, the folders, Daniel's files. All of it was packed in the waterproof bag against her hip, but paper did not matter if the living people carrying the truth died before daylight. Emma ordered. Marcus tried, his foot dragged. His breathing hitched. They made it 10 steps, then 12. A beam cracked somewhere above them. Emma pushed him under a steel support, just as burning debris dropped behind them. The heat shoved them forward. Marcus collapsed hard, pulling her down with him. This time he did not get back up. Rolled him onto his back. His lips had gone pale, his chest barely moved. "No," she said. It came out as a command. "No, you do not get to die here." Marcus did not answer. Emma pressed 2 fingers to his neck, a pulse weak, unsteady. There, she opened her medical kit with shaking hands. There was not enough equipment, not enough oxygen, not enough time. But medicine was often the art of refusing to accept the word enough when a human being was still warm beneath your hands. She cleared his airway, tilted his head, checked his breathing, and started working with everything she had. Smoke stung her eyes so badly, tears ran down her face, but she did not stop. Somewhere far away, sirens began to rise. Real sirens. Then one. Marcus drifted in a place between sound and darkness. He heard Emma's voice, but it came from far above him, as if he were once again under the factory floor. Then another voice came through, smaller and clearer. "Don't cry. Sir, my mom will save you, Lily." He saw the grate, the flashlight, the little girl's face above him. Not afraid of his name because she had not known it. Not interested in his power because it could not help him there. Only seen a man in pain and believed her mother would come. Marcus pulled one breath into his lungs, then another, saw his chest rise and bent closer. "That's it," she said, her voice breaking. "Now, you stay with me. You still owe the truth." Rescue crews found them minutes later. Nora Ellis had called them after Lily followed the plan. Emma had made her memorize, "If mommy does not call. Nora, tell her Greystone. Tell her the red folder. It is time." Lily had done exactly that. By dawn, Leon was in custody under guard. Marcus was in a hospital bed, hooked to monitors, his face bruised, his body weak, his left hand still trembling against the white sheet. Emma stood beside him when he woke. His voice was rough. Your daughter kept her promise. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Now keep yours. Marcus closed his eyes, then opened them again. This time he did not look away. Bring me the statement, he said. Before the sun fully rose over Detroit, Marcus Vail signed the first testimony that would begin the end of his own empire. 3 months later, the courtroom was so quiet that even the turning of a page sounded too loud. Outside, Detroit had begun to thaw. Dirty snow still clung to the curbs, but the worst of winter had loosened its grip, and thin sunlight that pushed through the courthouse windows in pale strips. Inside, no one seemed to breathe normally. Reporters filled the back rows. Former factory workers sat with their wives, their sons, their daughters, their old injuries hidden under sleeves and gloves. Men who had once lowered their voices at the name, Marcus Vail now watched him walk slowly down the center aisle, with a cane in one hand and a visible tremor in the other. This time, Marcus did not hide it. That was the first thing Emma noticed. He tucked his left hand into his coat pocket. He could have folded it behind his back. He could have done what he had done for months, maybe years, and turned weakness into something private. But he did not. His hand shook lightly at his side as he walked toward the witness stand, and he let everyone see it. To most people in the room, it was only a medical symptom. To Emma, it was more than that. It was the first honest thing his body had ever been allowed to say in public. Leon Ashby sat at the defense table in a dark suit, Clinshaven, still composed in the way men like him try to remain composed when the walls finally close in. He did not look at Emma, not look at Lily. He watched Marcus with an expression that was difficult to name, not hatred, not regret, something closer to betrayal, as if Marcus had broken some sacred rule by surviving him. Lily sat beside Emma, both hands folded around the stuffed rabbit in her lap. She was too young to understand all the legal language, but old enough to feel the weight in the room. Emma had almost left her with Nora, but Lily had asked to come, not for Leon, not even for Marcus. She wanted to hear someone say her father's name, where people had to listen. The prosecutor asked Marcus the question everyone had come to hear. Mr. Vail, did you order the death of Daniel Harper? Marcus looked toward Emma, not long, just enough to acknowledge that the answer mattered more to her than to the law. No, he said. A small movement passed through the courtroom. A release, a disappointment. Preparation for the usual escape men like Marcus found inside carefully chosen words. But Marcus did not stop. No, he repeated quieter now, I did not order Daniel Harper's death. But I built a world where a man like Leon Ashby knew he could arrange it and call it protection. I gave vague instructions to dangerous men because vague instructions kept my hands clean. Then, when Daniel died, I accepted the explanation that benefited me most. That is not innocence, that is responsibility. Emma closed her eyes. For years, she had imagined Marcus denying everything. She had imagined him smiling through lawyers, hiding behind technicalities, letting Daniel become one more dead man buried under paperwork. She had not imagined this Marcus Vail, under oath, helping the truth do what bullets and money had failed to stop. The prosecutor continued. Marcus testified about Greystone, the worker settlements, the false safety reports, the intimidation payments, the sealed medical claims, and the network of shell companies that had turned suffering into accounting. He named names. Some men in the room shifted when he did. Others stared at the floor. Leon remained still, but his jaw tightened every time Marcus gave the truth a date, an amount, a signature, a witness. Then Marcus spoke about the poisoning. He did not dramatize it. He did not make himself sound heroic. He described the tremors, the private bottles of water, the supplements Leon had arranged, the slow decline he had mistaken for disease. He admitted how badly he had wanted to believe in loyalty because loyalty had been the last thing in his life he thought he could trust. When asked why he had finally come forward, Marcus was silent for several seconds. Then he said, "'Cause a child found me under a factory floor and believed I was still worth saving before she knew my name. Her mother saved my life. Daniel Harper's files saved the truth. The least I could do was stop burying both." Lily leaned against Emma's arm. Emma did not move away. The trial lasted longer than that day. Trials always do. Truth may arrive in a moment, but justice moves through calendars, motions, objections, and signatures. Leon Ashby was eventually convicted on charges tied to the poisoning, the Greystone collapse, evidence destruction, conspiracy, and the death of Daniel Harper. Not every wound received a perfect legal answer. Real life rarely gives that much, but enough truth survived. Enough people spoke. Enough documents found daylight. Afterward, Marcus began dismantling what he could. Some companies were turned over to lawful management. Some assets were seized, others were liquidated into a compensation fund for injured workers and families who had spent years being told their pain was paperwork. A portion of Marcus' legitimate wealth went to community clinics across Detroit. One of them was Emma S. Though he did not put his name on the wall, Emma would not have allowed it. Weeks later, Marcus came to her clinic for a follow-up appointment. He arrived without a large security detail, without Leon, without the old armor of men standing between him and the world. He looked thinner, older, still dangerous in the way storms remain dangerous after they pass. So tired in a way that finally seemed human. Lily saw him first. She ran from the little table in the waiting room, holding a folded drawing in both hands. Emma started to tell her not to run, then stopped. Marcus lowered himself carefully into a chair so Lily could show him the picture. This time, the drawing did not show a man trapped under darkness. It showed the old factory from the outside. A little girl stood with a flashlight. A woman in a white coat stood beside her. And a man in a dark coat stood in the snow, not smiling exactly, but standing. Not under the floor anymore, Lily explained. Marcus studied the drawing as if it were a legal document, a confession, and a gift, all at once. No, he said softly. I suppose I am not. Lily looked at his left hand. It was shaking slightly against his knee. Are you still scared? She asked. Emma almost stepped in, but Marcus answered before she could. Sometimes. Lily nodded with great seriousness. Mom says honest scared is better than pretend brave. For a moment, Marcus could not speak. Then he looked at Emma. She stood in the doorway to the exam room, arms folded, face unreadable. There was no forgiveness in her expression. Not yet, maybe not ever, but there was no hatred burning there either. And Marcus understood that this too was more mercy than he had earned. He held out a sealed envelope. Emma did not take it right away. What is it, the last of Daniel's files, Mark said, and my sworn statement about what I knew, what I ignored, and what Leon buried. Emma looked at the envelope, then at him. Why now? Marcus' voice was low. Your daughter found me under the building, but you found me under everything else. Emma took the envelope. She did not say thank you. She did not say she forgave him. She looked him over the way a doctor looks at a difficult patient who has finally decided to live. Take your medication, she said. Open your own water bottles and show up next week. Marcus nodded. For him, that was enough. Outside, the city was still wounded, still cold in places, still full of men trying to hide what they had done. Something had shifted. Not everything. Never everything. Just enough. Marcus stepped out of the clinic into the pale afternoon light. His left hand trembled as he reached for his coat button. He saw it. He let it shake. Then he kept walking. He had spent most of his life believing power meant never needing anyone. One night, buried under concrete, he heard a little girl promise that her mother would save him. She had been right. The doctor saved his body. The child saved the part of him that still knew how to believe. And the truth, painful as it was, saved everyone else. All elements within this narrative are fictional and crafted for storytelling purposes. The author bears no intention of referencing real people, cultures, or events in a literal sense. Readers are encouraged to engage with the work as a piece of creative expression rather than documented reality.
This story is not only about a mafia boss trapped under a collapsed factory floor, it is about a powerful man trapped inside the consequences of his own silence. Marcus Vail spent his life believing that power meant control. He controlled rooms, contracts, people, money, and fear. But when he was buried under concrete, none of that power could save him. His reputation could not lift the beam off his leg. His money could not stop the bleeding. His authority could not calm his shaking hand. In that moment, the most feared man in Detroit became simply a wounded human being. And the first person to see him that way was a child. Lily did not know his crimes. She did not know his name. She saw pain, and she answered it with compassion. Her words, "Don't cry, sir. My mom will save you," remind us that kindness is not weakness. Sometimes kindness is the only force strong enough to break through pride, hatred, and fear. Emma's lesson is even deeper. She had every reason to let Marcus die. His world had taken her husband and left her with unanswered grief, but she chose to save him because she refused to let revenge decide who she became. That is true strength, not the absence of anger, but the discipline to act with principle while anger is still alive inside you. Marcus's journey teaches us that silence can be a form of guilt. He did not directly kill Daniel Harper, but he built a world where men like Leon could destroy innocent people and call it loyalty. Real responsibility begins when a person stops hiding behind technical innocence and finally asks, "What did my silence allow?" Leon shows the danger of loyalty without truth. Loyalty that controls, poisons, and possesses is not love. It is a cage. In the end, this story teaches that real power is not fear. Real power is accountability. Real courage is telling the truth when the truth costs you everything. And sometimes, being saved is not shameful. Sometimes, it is the first step toward becoming human again.